Hello and welcome back to the channel. Decided to try something a little bit new this time since it doesn't look like I'll be getting a PS5 anytime soon. I thought I'd start by doing certain reviews of some old comic books, DVDs, movies, whatever you want to consider. I thought I might as well do it. I'm going to start out here with Amazing Spider-Man, Secret of the Petrified Tablet. But before we get into that, as per all YouTube channels, we need to have a quick word from our sponsor. Here we are, a book. This is not just a sponsorship for a single book, but several books written by Dennis Boyd Call. He's written some pretty amazing books. They're pretty short, very thin, usually about 40 pages per book, and they're just life lessons, essentially. Very good books, very fun reads. He's also recorded an audiobook of one of his books called Bignorance. It's a combination of bigotry and ignorance, and he talks about where it comes from. He's basically a man who started out his life as an Idaho potato farmer and has ended up, as a pretty successful insurance salesman after a lifetime of doing all kinds of fun stuff. In the spirit of full disclosure, I will say I am not getting paid for this. However, he is my grandfather, so... look him up. You can find his books, get it on Kindle, buy them for about $10 each on Amazon, a few dollars cheaper on Kindle. They're pretty short reads, but they are some amazing things that you can learn from him about it. So, highly recommended. Check it out, and we'll go to that. Now we're back. Spider-Man. And this is going to be The Secret of the Petrified Tablet, written by Stan Lee, drawn mostly by, as you can see, John Romita Sr., So it's just a great storyline. This is a really good collection. It's the Epic collection of it. Last I checked, it was around $40 to get this collection. It includes 15 classic comic books written from 1968 to 1970 of Spider-Man. This is a really good story. It's a really great story. The plot is basically people are searching for this petrified tablet. Which is kind of a MacGuffin. Nobody really knows what it does, but everybody's after it, and, of course, everyone's favorite Spider-Man is on the case trying to stop people from getting it. It's a pretty darn good storyline, and in addition to that storyline, oh yes, Kangaroo. Who remembers him as a villain? But it also has a lot of other, side characters showing up. Oh yes, the first appearance of the Prowler. Not the Miles Morales Prowler, but the original Prowler, who was actually a pretty decent guy. There's all kinds of really fun stuff in here. There's the fight between Spider-Man and Quicksilver. Quicksilver actually does not do very well in that fight. It's pretty darn good. You had some great moments. Has probably one of my all-time favorite Chameleon storylines is found in this one. It has the moment that broke. Kingpin is also in this story. And the full story behind Peter Parker's parents is finally revealed, which is... I enjoyed it, but it can be... A lot of connoisseurs of Spider-Man consider it to be kind of a odd choice. It's sort of a goofy departure from how Spider-Man usually is. But everyone do their own. So one of the reasons I wanted to do a quick little review on this particular storyline, there's a couple reasons, but as you can see from the cover, this deals with protests. Which was a very hot topic, very controversial in the 1960s. So one of the reasons I picked this one, first off, civil rights. It's actually, if you want to know about civil rights in this time period, this is actually a pretty good book to kind of look at it because it deals with those issues. But one of the other things is that this is a very interesting story because no matter where you stand on the civil rights movement, what your politics were at the time, whether you agreed with civil rights but didn't like the protests, or whether you were 100% believed that the protests were completely justified, at the time, you can still read this about the protests and still enjoy it, regardless of what you believe. And Stan Lee had always said that when he writes comics, he always tries to write them so no matter what your politics were, you can still enjoy the comics. And it's something that's not really done nowadays anymore. A few people do it, but most comics are written with kind of one political viewpoint in mind when they cover politics, and they ignore the fact that maybe some of the fans and readers of the comics may not agree with that particular politics. So I want to kind of break down kind of the protests on campus storyline in this, and kind of explore why this wasn't, even though it was a controversial topic, why the comic itself isn't controversial but enjoyable by everyone. And I think it's kind of how he wrote it. So first off, 1968, most of the protests at the time were about the Vietnam War. Stan Lee, basically made this protest not about the Vietnam War, but made up kind of an issue that could happen on campus. And in this case, it was that the the protest was about the dean not allowing low-rent tenements to be built on campus for people who had less money. They were protesting the dean's decision to do that. And so it was a topic that could happen on campuses, but it wasn't, controversial on every single campus across the United States. So he nimbly dodged that. But what makes this really good is how he resolves this issue. So just to tell about the storyline, during the protest, Kingpin breaks into the museum that had the petrified tablet, and the protesters get blamed and arrested for being in collusion with Kingpin when they really weren't, and Spider-Man had to kind of, prove that they were innocent of that charge. Although the protesters did do some property damage, they got caught up in the moment and brought to forth. But in resolving this, what makes this so great is that when they resolved it, they had the dean come in and talk to them, and we learned that the dean wasn't against building these low-rent tenements. He was actually 100% for building the low-rent tenements, but he couldn't announce immediately. He had to take time and convince the board that that would be the right decision to do. And he basically just needed time and space to do it, and then the students' response to this was, wait, why didn't you tell us this earlier? And the dean said, well, I didn't think students should have a voice in this, but considering everything that's happened, I believe I was wrong. I believe you should have a voice in this. And the student said, well, I suppose we jumped to conclusions and we rushed our judgment. So the conclusion to it is really, really interesting for me, because basically both sides said, we're ultimately trying to do the right thing. Both sides came back and kind of said, yeah, we could have handled this better. And it was a resolution that kind of wouldn't annoy anybody on either side of the debate. And it's very refreshing to read something that covers such a controversial topic without actually being controversial itself. It's a great read, and it's really, really good. Now, I feel like I can't continue or recommend this story without trying to get it to stand up, and it keeps tipping over there, without bringing up a modern day adaptation of this. I don't have the book with up or with me, so I can't show it to you, but it's written by Steven Petrucca. Here is a book he did write. Let's back a little bit. Deadpool Pause. It's a pretty good book. I actually have no idea if this is going to do an image reversal on me, but trust me, it says Deadpool and Pause on it, and Spider-Man over here. But he's a pretty good writer of Marvel comic book characters. He wrote one with Captain America called Dark Designs. He's pretty solid, so I was excited that he wrote an adaptation of it. So, first one, this one is make this change. One of the changes he made in the book makes a bit of sense to me, but it's also kind of a weird change, is that he set this storyline in modern day. And I can understand why they would want to do that. I mean, one of the ways you get new readers interested in old stories is to kind of update the stories and set them in modern day. But this was such a 1960s story that it just feels a little odd to me. Now, the second thing is that he updated the language in it. Now, I don't think this was his fault. I think the editor made this mistake, but it was so hilariously bizarre of a change. So there's a sequence in the book. It's not in this comic. I think it actually happened in a different Spider-Man comic book, but I'm not sure, where Flash Thompson, who was in the Army, had returned from, he was on leave, and he was talking to the old gang and stuff like that, and he was kind of hitting on Gwen Stacy, who was Spider-Man's girl, and Peter Parker was a little bit, upset about that and challenged Flash, and Flash, says, well, what guy wouldn't be attracted to, Gwen Stacy? I mean, come on. And it was, it's one of those comments that is fairly innocuous, especially for the time period it was written, but I can see modern day people saying, no, we can't do that. And so I would expect a modern adaptation to Flash to have said something like, what straight guy wouldn't be interested in Gwen Stacy? That's not what he said in the modern adaptation, and what he said was, what heteronormative guy wouldn't be interested in Gwen Stacy? I'm sorry, that just, even thinking back on it, it still makes me laugh because it's so not what a soldier on leave would actually say. And it's such a bizarre reworking of the framework that it doesn't sound like how Stephen Petrucca wrote his other books. It feels like some editor somewhere said, hey, we have to, make that change. Let's add the word heteronormative, and, Stephen Petrucca would be in the meeting going like, and they said, hey, this is your check. You want your check? Check. And then he says, yeah, sure, heteronormative is fine. But it's not a word that would be in common usage. That's a very specific terminology used in kind of people who study human sexuality, people who perhaps teach classes and so forth on it would use. It's not something that is common usage. So it's just one of those moments that's so bad it's hilarious in my head, but it was great. But the final thing I want to talk about was something that kind of disturbed me. It was a change made to one of the dialogues in this book. And so the dialogue that happens, it takes place after the protest when one of Robbie Robertson, who was the editor at the Daily Bugle, he was, I believe he was the first recurring black character in any comic book. So he's a very progressive character for the time and even for modern day. His son had been in these protests, and there's been a lot of back and forth between father and son about the protests and going on and stuff like that. I just have to add, there was an interesting little conversation in the updated ones where Robbie Robertson says, you weren't around the 60s, but I remember what it was like back in the 60s. And I'm just like going like, but the story's set in the 60s. I know you've updated it, but come on. I just found it fine. But this one was a little bit disturbing, was that there's a conversation that he has with his son after the events. And in the middle of the conversation, J. Jonah Jameson comes in, and they have a massive argument about some of the stuff that Robbie's done. Robbie was too nice to Spider-Man in the conversation, and they have essentially an argument, J. Jonah Jameson being his usually blustering self, Robbie Robertson threatening to quit, and J. Jonah Jameson kind of backing off, but still saving face when he backed off, being his usual blustery self. It was a great interaction between the two, and we get this conversation. Let me open it up to there. So let's see. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's up here in the corner right there. But after J. Jonah Jameson leaves, Robbie's son says, that's what I mean, Dad. Why should you have to take all that bull from a racist like him? And Robbie says, and that's what I mean, son. You've got a good brain. Use it. Jameson is no more a racist than little Eva. He's a big, blundering blowhard with a hang-up about Spider-Man, but just because he's white, it doesn't make him a racist. We'll never get anywhere till we recognize who our real enemies are. Now, I've read a lot of books set in the 60s. A lot of them deal with civil rights movements. Most of them are fiction, but that's one of my favorite lines about the civil rights movement, because I think it reflects kind of how the movement was, how the kind of back and forth of civil rights movement. Now, when they made the changes in Stephen Petrucca's adaptation, the change was basically the same. Was basically saying the same things you see in a lot of other, a lot of modern interpretations of civil rights. It's like, we're victims because we're black. We need to keep fighting the man, and we're owed because of all the bad stuff that's happened to us, which, isn't in my opinion, is not a good interpretation of the civil rights movement. You know, I could be wrong, but I think there's a quote that Martin Luther King said about the civil rights movements. He said, "I hope that my children will be raised in a world where they are judged by the quality of their character, not by the color of their skin." And, you know, for me, that summarizes what the civil rights movement was about. It wasn't about, you know, being victims or reparations or any of the stuff that modern day looks at the civil rights movement. It was about people being equal with each other. A black man going in for a job, having the exact same chance of getting the job as a white man who came in for the same job. And that's kind of what it's about. And yeah, and it just really bothered me in the adaptation of this, that they changed that so much. It's, I suppose it's just me, but that's just one of the deeply meaningful, important things about it. So anyway, Secret of the Petrified Tablet, highly recommended. It'll cost you about $40 to get. It's a very good storyline. I'm going to say it might be a little dodgy. It depends on where you're at, but library used to do interlibrary loans quite well, and you could either find this book at the library or get an interlibrary loan and find it. But I highly recommend you get it, you read it, and yep, you keep going on with that. So that's my review. Let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Do you think there were better choices for a Spider-Man for people to read or not? Let me know. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.